So, welcome to Illusion of Control. Betty Ann Heggie and myself, Kellie Garrett, are happy to deliver this webinar to hopefully help you through these strange times. So, the structure is that Betty Ann's just going to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to share a few slides on some background relative to control. Then we're going to do some storytelling and share some strategies that have worked for each of us, as well as what hasn't worked. And then we're going to use chat to discuss thematic questions from the participants. So when we get to that part, if you want to put questions or comments in the chat, we'll choose some topics to talk about. And finally, Betty Ann is going to close our hour with a meditation to help calm us all down and feel like control, who cares? We don't need control. So I'm going to turn it over to Betty Ann, and she's going to talk about how we got here.
So I woke up one morning, maybe a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, probably 6 weeks ago, and I had another pandemic dream. And in this pandemic dream, I was in a hanging basket chair, which is something I really love because it kind of lulls me like a baby. And I was swinging back and forth and I was loving it. And then I swung over the edge and I looked down and I realized that my swing was on the top of a very tall building. And I was swinging over the edge and I was looking down a lot of stories and it was scary. And I thought, I really need a railing here. And so then there was a railing, but the railing was made out of rubber bands. And I knew every time I swung out, that railing stretched. And then I came back and I knew that railing wasn't going to hold me up. And I felt great fear. So I got out of bed that morning and I started thinking, first of all, analyzing the dream as I do, and realized that it was not a comforting dream. I was waking up feeling that I hadn't had a good rest because I was worried about being on this tall building and that I wasn't safe. And I started thinking about how clearly this was a pandemic dream where I'd had this lull in this life where I was floating along and I was loving everything and suddenly everything felt dangerous. And I felt like the barriers that were put up for me were not providing safety for me. And clearly I had to do something to try to control this. And I thought, boy, you know, my whole life, I thought I had control. I have a schedule of a rolling 4-year average of where I'm planning to travel internationally every January, every May, and every October. And they're all slotted in, so I'm covering different continents and all the places I want to go. And suddenly, all those travel plans are out the window, and I can't even make any plans because everything's so uncertain. And then, of course, I look at my calendar, and I have always lived and died by my calendar and my friends make jokes that if you want to see me, you know, make sure you get on my calendar and be prepared for it to be at least 3 or 4 months out, maybe 6, because I have so many little pieces that I fit together. And I've always considered that a great accomplishment because I'm fitting so much into my life. And all of that calendar, I just had to go through and erase everything that I wanted to do, you know, go to concerts, have people over for dinner, go to theater, all erased out. And then I realized, of course, that I didn't, you know, my kids are grown. At least I wasn't having to homeschool kids at the same time as I was concerned about job performance, but I still felt so uncertain and so robbed of my life. It was all just gone, gone, gone. And I couldn't find any certainty anywhere. Usually when we have a threat in our lives, we go into fight or flight, and we can quickly, once the threat has subsided, go back to our baseline. But every day, our baseline was being taken away from us. So one day we should not wear masks. The next day we should. We should stay home. We should go out and help revitalize the economy. Every day was something. Oh, asymptomatic people are a big threat. Oh, asymptomatic people, you don't get it through that. You know, it's just like every day, we can't seem to come to any certainty. And I just thought, all these years, I thought that I could create certainty by being in control. And it really worked for me for a long time. And suddenly, it was just all pulled out from underneath me. And I felt like I have no control. It has all been an illusion. So I was making the bed as I was thinking about all this. I went over to my telephone and I picked the phone up and I phoned Kelly and I said, "Are you feeling this way?" Because she and I always have great talks. And she was like, "Yeah," but she had a different perspective, but she was feeling it too. And I said, "Why don't we just, other people have got to be feeling this. Let's have an online discussion. And you and I just talk about our thoughts on it and get everybody else's thoughts, and maybe we can just all kind of benefit from it. And at the very least, I always say we teach what we most need to learn. And I just needed to spend some time sifting through all of my thoughts and feelings about how I had lost control of my life.
Or at least what you formerly thought was control.
Or what I thought was my life.
Right. So thank you for teeing that up. I'm going to share the screen now and just set the stage for the rest of what we will talk about. So, as Betty Ann said, COVID-19 has thrown into relief how many unknowns there are around the pandemic itself, and perhaps had us philosophize about how unknowns affect our lives as well. And I came across a nice quote from a psychiatrist, Dr. Maxine Lewis, who said, "Anxiety and a loss of control results from so many unknowns. When will people be able to return to work, school, and regular schedules? And one of the great difficulties in all of this is the sense that it's not in our control. So we need to focus on things that we do have control over. I can't control that my working life has changed dramatically and I can't go out for dinner, but there are lots of things I can still get pleasure from." And I should mention, I'm going to be sharing the very few slides that we're using here, as well as a number of other slides that'll have some resources and links to articles and so on. So the lack of control spans a continuum.
Kelly, I've got a comment here. If you just want to have a quick look.
Sure.
Kathleen says that we may want to change to slideshow view. We see presenter view.
Uh-oh. Okay, well, that could be beyond my competency level. Hang on one second. And remember, you get what you pay for. Okay.
It says Paul's coming on saying go to the top of the screen.
Is that better?
I think all you have to do is click on the use of the slide. Everybody says yes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, whoever shared that helpful hint. So one of the things to stress here is that lack of control spans a continuum. So for some people, it's a dramatic change, loss of income that may even affect their ability to remain in their home or apartment, work that requires interaction where essential workers have to go in whether they're anxious or not. Everything from lack of social gatherings, scary news about the pandemic, and people who are glued to the news and can't seem to let it go. Now there's the increased focus on race issues, which were there all along and are also here in Canada, lest we feel superior to our friends in the South. We are not. And then there's people who don't comprehend what's going on. They may have dementia, autism like my younger son, and so on. And no matter how dramatic the lack of control is, everybody's reaction is different. So somebody who actually is experiencing something that we look at and think, oh my God, I'd be freaking out, may actually be fairly sanguine about it. And others who, on the surface, it's like, okay, well, big deal, you can't go out, may be very, very anxious. And the consequences are all different as well. So mental health is an increasing issue, and it may be minor, from low anxiety and fear to major, and cause someone to actually enter a mental health crisis. The isolation from loved ones is different for everyone. Some people live alone, other people are stuck with each other too much, and domestic violence is on the rise. So everybody's experience is different and the consequences are different, as are the reactions. And feeling in control, apparently, is a basic human need. Who knew? So another quote, which I love the title, "The Plan to Stop Being a Control Freak." Life inevitably shows we can't control everything, it makes us fearful and uncomfortable. And that's actually normal. So to feel less fearful and more in control, we try controlling everything around us, even things that have nothing to do with the part of our life that made us feel badly to start with. Unfortunately, that's not a positive response, because being controlling, or more controlling than maybe we already are, depending on who we are, or freaking out because we feel this loss of control, isn't going to help ourselves or anyone else. So there's a long list here of signs of being controlling. You're going to get a copy of these slides. You know, Betty Ann referenced being highly organized and liking systems. I'm the same as her. And, you know, one of my issues is all or nothing thinking, which I never thought of as controlling, but apparently there are various creative ways of being controlling. And definitely I could describe myself as type A. So there are a bunch of signs here that may point out to you being controlling. So 3 major drivers of controlling behavior, which are certainly not the only ones, are fear. We try and control things because of what we think will happen if we don't. We may have grown up in a home where we felt we had little or no control, and therefore as adults we really want to be in control. And thirdly, we may be perfectionistic. So we want things to be done a certain way, super high standards and so on. So I'm going to turn it over to Betty Ann now and stop the screen sharing so you can see her lovely face with her hair that has not been cut in months and looks fantastic. And she's going to share a few stories.
So needing control for me obviously comes from a basis of fear from my early childhood. I was a victim of early childhood sexual abuse, and my first perpetrator was when I was 5 years old, and it was a policeman. And of course, you're taught to trust policemen, and so when I was in this position of having been sexually abused by one, that was my first reality that maybe the world was not a place I could trust. And unfortunately, that was not the only perpetrator in my life, and all of the other perpetrators were men that were in positions of trust in my life. One was a male babysitter, one was a friend's father, one was a father of my friend, and one was a school teacher. So that made me look for ways to try to control my life and try to find some certainty, because I felt like if I didn't do that, I had fear that I wasn't going to be taken care of, or I was going to be at risk. In fact, so much that when I had daughters, I wanted to prevent them from having this and tried all kinds of control methods, one of which was when they wanted to start babysitting, I wouldn't allow the father of the house to drive them home after babysitting. I stayed up no matter how late it was, and I went and picked them up. And I remember one of them saying to me, "You know, Mom, you've made us afraid of men." And I thought to myself, good, that was my objective. So you see, I was trying so hard not only to control my life, but also to control theirs. Once I became a vice president, I've done a lot of work on the fact that I had this experience early in my life and how it has affected me. And I've gone to lots of workshops and I've done lots of therapy. At one point, I went to a workshop called The Truth Will Set You Free, and it was for victims of childhood sexual abuse. And the facilitators had us do an exercise where we went into a meditative state. They had us take our perpetrator and put them into a sack, and then they would put the sack into the water on the edge of the ocean, and all these waves came over it, and there was all this sparkly sunshine, and people then described that when they opened up the bag again, that starfish came out, or seashells. Well, in my case, the perpetrator came back out, and he was sneering at me exactly as he did when I was a young girl. And I was in a powerless position. But this time he stepped back because he was afraid of me, because I was now a senior vice president in a global corporation. So I realized at that moment that I worked so hard and drove myself so hard to make sure that I could be successful so that I could be safe. And the way that I became successful was to become a perfectionist. I made sure that every project I ran was perfect, that there was never any mistakes. I tried to predict anything that could happen so that I had a risk mitigation strategy in place for it so that nothing ever went wrong, and when it did, I was prepared. And so that meant everybody could always depend on my results. It obviously took a lot out of me. And when I was working, and after I'd had 2 small children, I got really sick, because that's a lot of stress on your adrenals to always be looking for everything to make sure that you never make a mistake. You know, perfectionism is really a demon that's masquerading as a strength. And it really does hurt you. It takes so much out of you because you just don't enjoy your life. You're spending all your time in the past ruminating over mistakes that you've made, or in the future trying to prevent things that might happen, that you're never really in the present moment able to enjoy yourself. Anyway, I ultimately got really sick. I got Epstein-Barr syndrome. I was the first person in Saskatchewan to be diagnosed with it. And that was the precursor to chronic fatigue syndrome. And I was really ill for a long time. And the doctors said, there's nothing we can do for you. It's immune disorder. And so that was when I decided that if there was nothing that the medical science could do for me, there must be something I could do for myself. And I went to the library and took out every book I could find on people who had cured themselves of terminal illness. And what I found was that the common thread that I found in all those books, that was before the internet, was that people meditated and visualized themselves healthy. So I went back to the library and I took out at that time, probably only 5 books on meditation, because I decided I had to teach myself to meditate, which I did from books, and I started meditating, and it really helped me. Within a short period of time, I found that it helped. My immune system was much stronger. I wasn't getting sick when everybody in the office had a cold or a flu. I was able to accept social engagements without getting absolutely exhausted. It really worked. But I didn't give up all it really did, it was kind of give me a balance in my life, that I was driving so hard on one side, but I was actually taking the time to have some being time and relax. So that was positive. One day, my boss, the CEO of our company, said something that violated my personal value system. And I quit my job just like that. And he obviously felt guilty about what he'd done and didn't want to own up to it, and also knew that the board liked me, and he didn't want to be responsible for me leaving. So he started to hurt my credibility with the board. And what he told them is I was way too controlling, so it was better that I left. And I thought to myself, I wasn't insulted. I actually thought, yeah, he's right. I had to be controlling because I did not have the same latitude for error that the guys had. If I made a mistake, everybody was going to pay a lot of attention to it. I wasn't going to be able to slide it past. So I don't apologize for being controlling. In fact, I wore that perfectionism like a badge of honor. But it did take way too much out of me. And I continued to use, after I left my office, I continued to use that controlling. I've got a calendar, I'm filling it up, I'm doing all these things, I'm taking all these trips. Nothing I hate more than somebody messing with my calendar when they want to change something and I've got it all figured out, like my Lego. So it was only when COVID came along that I had this whole scale, it just wiped it all out, pulled the rug out from underneath me, and I had none of it left. And that's again where I really realized what an illusion all this control was, that there was no certainty and I couldn't protect myself from fear. In fact, I had more of it and I couldn't protect myself from it.
Well, thank you for your very raw and honest story there, Betty Ann. So in contrast, I was the least controlling person you can imagine as a youngster. I was a very happy-go-lucky kid, and I had a great sense of humor like my dad, who called me Bozo the Clown and La 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 Kelly, and people who met me at work might have understood the Bozo, but not the La La La. My mother was very controlling and ruled the roost, and I vowed I was never going to be like her. So fast forward to my early 30s when I became a mother. And, you know, whatever ideas we may have before we become a parent, including controlling those kidlets, except for maybe Betty Ann, I felt completely out of control, starting with lack of sleep. I was a bit of a screamer as a mother, and I was a micromanager at work. And the more I tried to control things at home and at work, the better I felt. I don't think anyone else felt better, but I felt better. So if I had a handle on every little thing at work and every little thing my kids did, I felt that things ran smoothly, or at least they did in my head. And then my youngest son was diagnosed with autism. And that was perhaps my first experience with a complete loss of control. It is wrenching to receive a diagnosis of any kind involving your children. And my husband and I were no different. And we weren't very good at navigating the new normal. And we ended up divorcing, which is another feeling of loss of control, including, even though I was lucky enough to remain friends with my ex, I was sending my children off to another household every week because we had full joint custody and had no control over what was going on over there. Not that I had tons of control in my own house, but at least I had the illusion of control. Like Betty Ann, I was a perfectionist. One of my peers and I, when we were senior vice presidents, used to joke that we always felt we were one day away from being fired. So that was how we rationalized that we had to be perfectionists. And so one of my coping strategies was that I didn't feel I had enough credibility at the executive table with just an undergrad arts degree in a wildly practical English literature and philosophy, by the way. And so I started my credential-seeking behavior, which was a way to control the anxiety that I felt vis-a-vis my right, if you will, to be at the table. The last credential I received was as a Brene Brown facilitator, which, funny enough, helped cure my constant striving for more credentials and has really helped me in my life, including this whole control issue and the current pandemic. So one of the things that Brene Brown teaches is that it's a very common experience for us, no matter how accomplished we are, to feel that nothing is ever enough. And so the center of my vision board now says, I have enough, I do enough, I am enough. Now, I thought that would be my vision board in 2013, and it's remained on my vision board every year because I'm still not there yet. Some days I'm quite there on the have enough front, not so much the do enough and am enough. The other thing was, other than motherhood, I always associated being controlling or wanting control with work. But one time I was on a holiday with my sister and our families, and my husband and brother-in-law, I can't remember which one said it to the other, said, uh-oh, two executives in the kitchen trying to control things, let's go have a beer on the deck. And my sister and I really were quite offended until we got over ourselves and started laughing and realizing that we had been sparring over, in essence, control. Who was going to cook what and all that kind of thing. So families are humbling. And when the pandemic hit, everything I had planned, like many of you, vanished overnight. I was only home 6 nights in February, and I went from that to being home every single day. But I didn't feel a lack of control per se. I felt oddly relieved to suddenly be able to sleep in, and I decluttered everything and started baking bread. And then I wound up in the hospital with a severe allergic reaction to penicillin. And shortly after that, got shingles because my immune system was down. And certainly felt a complete lack of control walking into that hospital, which my husband had to leave me at the door at. Now, fortunately, it wasn't a dire thing. What I noticed after those two episodes was that I felt uncharacteristically anxious, which is not normal for me. And it started to spill over into other things. And I was shorter with my husband and obsessively watching the coronavirus worldometer stats and things like that. So it's humbling to realize that we want control, we need control, and then, we actually don't have it, and maybe we never did. So I'm going to turn it over to Betty Ann now, and she's going to share some strategies that have worked for her on control.
So the things that I work on and remind myself every day are, first of all, underlying anything that I try to do. I have to say, first of all, I have to accept that it is an uncertain universe. We can't plan, predict, prevent what's going to happen in an uncertain universe. And we live with the mistaken belief that we can create certainty if we control, and it's not true. So our first thing that we have to accept and remind ourselves of, or me, every day, is that it is an uncertain universe. And I can control my choices, but I can't control the result. I can't control the future. The one that I've had to work the most on is reminding myself that it is a friendly universe. And that if I will let go and let the universe do it, that I will usually end up with a better result than what I could have done, because the universe is actually looking out for me. And of course, that is contrary to the message that I programmed my subconscious with when I started at 5 years old, having been sexually abused. And so it's one of those things that sometimes things that are bad end up being good, because it did cause me to go on to be successful and then try to do things that would help other women. So there are reasons why things happen, and it's a friendly universe. And if we ultimately can believe that I'm still here, I'm living a great life, it can't have been all bad. It's a friendly universe. And we just have to trust that the universe has a better plan. So the first thing I have to do is always give up over planning. And that means valuing downtime as much as productivity. And one of the ways that we can do that, especially when we are over planners, is to designate downtime on our calendars. So what I tend to do when I'm doing my calendar is sit down and say, okay, here's where I'm going to exercise, and I get it marked on my calendar. And here's some of the people that I want to make sure that I see, and I put them on my calendar. And here's some of the things that I want to do. Theater, put that on my calendar. And then I go through and I say, all right, I have to erase some things because I have to allow for downtime. So I actually make it a practice to go through and erase things off my calendar. Secondly, I have to acknowledge times to myself when I didn't push and it turned out better, because that reminds me that it's a friendly universe, that if I don't push, I'm going to get a better result. So for example, this has happened a long time ago when I used to sew, so that tells you how long ago it was. But I used to work across the street in Saskatoon from Eaton's, and Eaton's had their fabrics in their lower level, and I could walk over from my building to Eaton's down to the lower level to the food court for lunch, and I would walk through the fabrics. And I found this fabric that I really loved and really wanted, and it was too expensive. And I didn't push it, and I didn't pine it, and I just let it go. And a few weeks later, as I was walking through Eaton's, the majority of that fabric had been sold, and there was enough left to make what it was that I wanted to sew, and it was in the bargain bin. That's a friendly universe. So it's not only does it happen when we don't push, but it means that we have to remind ourselves and acknowledge that we have a friendly universe. The next one for me is giving up perfectionism. And this is what Kelly was talking about. I liked her, you are enough. Believe that your abilities are enough. Because so often we decide that we have to overcompensate. And that means that we're not being who we really are. And then when we actually end up having successes, we feel like we're a fraud because it wasn't really us. We're not being who we really are. And one of the things that I've found being a perfectionist is that I often don't try things that I might enjoy because I'm afraid that I'm not going to be perfect at it. So while Kelly went off and took all this extra training, I somewhere decided that I probably wouldn't get perfect marks. So therefore, why would I want to take those things and expose that I wasn't as smart as I thought I should be? So therefore, I didn't do them. So perfectionism actually dampens our abilities to enjoy our lives. And my third strategy, because I've done a lot of 12-step work, and this comes from 12-step work, is let go and let God. Now, I know that God is a name that some people have trouble with. So I always use universe, but some people use higher power, others use great spirit, higher self. But the whole idea is just don't try to be God in your own life. And don't let God do God's work and let the universe do their work. And it's a friendly universe, and work in partnership with that universe. So you can control your own internal. You can control your own feelings, desires, emotions, judgments. You can't control the external. And there's a woman named Byron Katie, and I've gone off and she's considered one of the most spiritual people on the planet. And I've gone off and done a 10-day school with her. And she always says there's your business, there's God's business, and there's other people's business. And if you're in your own business, you're controlling your internal. But if you're in other people's business or you're in God's business, those are external. You can't control those, and that is going to bring you a lot of stress. So ultimately, this is about surrendering to the universe. It's about letting go and letting things happen. Now, I have to tell you, for all of us that think that we are here to make things happen, it's really hard for us to do that. It's really hard for us to surrender and say, I guess I wasn't supposed to make that happen. But I always go back to the serenity prayer, which is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. So similar to Betty Ann, but just as a preamble, I was brought up by parents in the 60s in Montreal who were kind of hippy-dippy and taught us all the religions of the world and that they were all one, and that all beliefs were valid, including non-belief. And as a little kid, I said to my father, well, cut to the chase, Dad, what do you believe? And he's like, well, I like Indigenous spirituality the best. Nature is my church, and being outside is where I commune with spirit. And I'm the very same as him. So unlike Betty Ann, I don't think it is a friendly universe, nor do I think it's an unfriendly universe. I think it is a somewhat neutral universe. So we all have our different ways of making meaning in the world. So when I say surrender, there's a wonderful quote by Rumi that says, try something different, surrender. So I have that right in front of me on my desk, because the whole notion of not analyzing the crap out of something and trying to figure it out myself and then AKA control it is a bit of a foreign notion for me. So surrender is one of the strategies that I use to reduce the need to control. And what that means for me is acknowledging that I don't have all the answers, and that sometimes the harder I try to cognitively figure something out, the less I'm able to. So surrendering to just letting it go, not understanding where it's going to go, and allowing myself to feel without analyzing, which is very difficult for me. And noticing when the need for control and anxiety associated with that arises, and just let it go. And like Betty Ann, there have been many times where the more I let go, the better the outcome was. Another strategy I use is to time box my anxiety sessions. So I remember having a coach, which I am now, tell me that my analytical brain was causing me deep problems, and that I thought of myself as self-aware, but that I actually wasn't that self-aware, because as soon as an emotion arose, I would start to analyze the crap out of it. And he said, you love gardening. So when a seed emerges from the earth, you have this short little plant that's an inch high. And if you started smothering it, it would not flower to what it's meant to be. And in your case, as soon as an emotion arises, you smother it and start analyzing it. So just let it be and let it flower. And what you thought might have been anger is actually sadness. So to time box anxiety sessions, because it's scary for someone like me to allow myself to feel deeply, is to okay, we're going to be anxious from 9 a.m. to 9:30 today, and then we are going to put a box on that sucker, and we're not going to be anxious again till tomorrow. And then I will do something that will actively distract me, whether it's fiction, whether it's working on something, whether it's playing in my garden. A third one, similar to what Betty Ann mentioned, is the stay in your own lane, which my friend Denise Tucker, who's also a coach, came up with relative to parenting adult children. But it's also about not giving advice to other people unless they specifically ask for it. Sometimes in our efforts to control our own anxiety, we give advice to other people and want them to follow it because it's going to validate something within us. Another one is to focus on what you can control. So find a pursuit that gets your mind off that awful hamster wheel of overanalyzing or worry. So I've lost 10 pounds during COVID, something I have tried my hardest to do for years, because I decided one of the things I could control was walking 10,000 steps a day. And so I've been doing that, trying not to drink too much wine. I'm from Montreal, it's not my fault. And I'm magically, glacially slowly losing weight. And awareness, to count how often you do or say something controlling and or feel anxious about a loss of control, and just be aware of it, be kind to yourself, let it go. So I'm now going to Betty Ann. Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, I'm going to go to the chat now, which means I'm going to stop sharing. Look at how proficient I am. So does anyone have a comment or a question they would like us to philosophize about with you? It's interesting how we both have the surrender thing. It just has a different angle.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I didn't talk about, I'll maybe talk about this while we're waiting to see if other people have things they'd like us to speak about, but is detachment, because that's something I've spent a lot of time, because over my life, I'm always like, okay, I'm too attached to this outcome. Why am I so attached? And so that basically means that, you're trying to, until we started working on this, Kelly, I didn't really think about attachment being so tied into wanting to control things. But of course, when you're trying to control things, you're trying to get a certain outcome. Mm-hmm. And that means that you get very attached to something very specific. Right. And there's a guy named Mike Dooley, and I've been to one of his workshops.
Yeah, I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, he was on The Secret, and he talks about visualizing what you want to create it. But what he says is that way too many of us are tied into visualizing, but wanting it to be very specific. So he said, just say you want success or you want happiness, but don't say that happiness is a red Corvette, because then you're just going to make yourself unhappy. So what I do around attachment is I always try, when I get hooked into fear or anger or a power play with somebody else, I recognize that I'm attached, and then I need to step back. And the way that I step back is by activating my senses and trying to get into the present moment. And that means have a bath, take deep breaths, take a walk in nature. And what that does is it takes me to a place of peace, which means that I can then stand back and let the universe do its job, and usually I allow things to come, which is the better result.
Yeah. So somebody asked, Carlene asked, can you expand on stay in your own lane regarding adult children? So my children are now 27 and 29, and I remember Max was really struggling in university, and every time they came over for dinner, I was basically nagging him and trying to control his lack of study habits and so on. And my friend Denise said to her, stay in your own lane means that is it something that is going to endanger their health? And if the answer is no, which it is 99% of the time, then just don't comment unless they explicitly ask you for advice. And I remember saying to my husband, who's their stepfather, it's really hard to parent adult children. And he said, well, that's because you're not supposed to parent them, which of course you've been parenting them since they were born. So it's very difficult to let go. So that's what that one means. Someone else said, and I'll turn it over to you, Betty Ann, to answer. Do you think you would have achieved your professional success with the philosophies you now embody? What difference would that, the advice that you're now giving, have made earlier in your career?
Well, I think that I could have enjoyed myself a lot more in my career if I hadn't been so obsessively compulsive about wanting certain results. And quite frankly, probably could have had better results in many cases because I could have allowed the universe to let it happen. What I try to do now is look to other people who are more laid back, who are in successful positions, and see how they do it, because I think I can maybe model their behavior. And I do this on boards because, we don't want, when we're on boards, everybody has to talk. We don't want to be the one that's controlling the conversation. It's important that everybody gets to talk. And so, this seeking balance is something that, or trying to find your center is something that all of us need to do. Mm-hmm. And, I'm probably never going to let go of my desire to want to, I love to renovate, to try to have the perfect result and think of all the ways that people might move. But what I can do now is step back and say, I don't, like you, surrender. I don't have the answer. And quite often one will come to me. Right. So for example, last year, I wanted to wallpaper the ceiling because I wanted an interesting ceiling, and the wallpaper seam showed, and I was upset. And my daughter, who's far more laid back, more like my husband, said, Mom, finding a solution means we're going to end up with a superior ceiling. And what she did was she epoxied it, and now it kind of shines, and it looks fantastic, and we never would have thought of that. So that's an example of a friendly universe, allowing things to happen.
Yeah. There's a really interesting comment from Jay Schofield. Do you ever think you're in control, but you're not? Vis-a-vis the illusion of control. Even during COVID, we can stay inside, don't meet others, and so on, because you're in control managing COVID. So I don't think our title, Illusion of Control, means, you're absolutely right. There are some things we can control. And one of the things to assist us when we are feeling anxiety and fear about what we can't control is to focus on what we can. Are we going to shelter in place? Are we going to wear a mask? Are we going to really limit how many people we're in contact with? So that's a really great point.
May I add to that? I noticed myself, because I'm a controlling person, that I started then trying to control my husband's cleanliness during because because I think everything has to be so intentional. Like, I'm going to touch that. I've touched it. Now I have to make sure I cleanse my hands. Whereas he's always like, well, I've got gloves on. I don't need to worry. I can adjust my mask. And I'm like, no, gloves have touched things. And now you're adjusting your mask. And that's how. So I think I started trying to over control him. So that was an example to me of not having control in the outside world, but trying to exercise something I thought I could control.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a great story. Brenda Wallace says, can you speak about the competing need to be self-aware, that is, notice when your need for control is generating issues, while also getting outside your own head so you can be present for the people around you? I think whether it's a need for control issue or anything else, it is a constant dance between not focused so much on being self-aware that we become self-absorbed, and being fully present for people. And I worked with some wonderful people in my executive job at all levels who had no issue telling me that I wasn't listening to them. And I'd be at my computer typing and saying, oh, yes, I am, and turn and look at them. And got great coaching and biting advice from some of them that I made them feel like I wasn't present. So to me, to stop what you're doing and also let go of whatever it is you're thinking or trying to control, and to breathe and to look that other person in the eye or fully listen if it's the phone, allows us to relinquish that self-absorption. Self-awareness is a very good thing, but we have to, in a way, time box that as well, and notice when we are moving into maybe offering controlling advice, pull ourselves back, and then ask questions. Asking questions is one of the ways that I turn the attention to the other person when I'm starting to feel that I'm focused too much on myself. What about you, Betty Ann?
Well, what I think is interesting, self-awareness is really important, or awareness is really important when I talk about detachment, because you have to stop to realize that you are attached to a certain outcome in order to be able to find your center again, which in order to be able to step back and use some of the mitigation exercises of using your senses to get into the present moment. What's interesting about all this is that, and with detachment, I'm not saying stand back and say, oh, okay, well, I give up, I'm not doing anything, because you don't want to be over controlling that you're trying to find a certain outcome, but you also don't want to stand back and say, okay, I don't care. I mean, it's appropriate to try to get feedback from other people and ask them if what you're doing, to try to even get them on board with your project and to make judgments about it. Mm-hmm. It's just that you want to make sure that you're finding somewhere in the middle, that you're not doing too much of it so that you're pushing too hard, and that you're not just walking away and saying, okay, well, I'm not doing anything.
All right. So in the interest of time, there's lots of good comments here. We're going to have an evaluation afterwards, and one of the pieces will be to ask about any other topics you're interested in, because we may do a future webinar. Might charge something for a charity, but stay tuned. So I'm just going to share the screen again before Betty Ann leads a meditation to close. So one of the strategies to deal with lack of control is to ground ourselves and get clarity. And the more wound up or anxious we are, the harder it actually is to release control. We can actually get anxious about how much control we want, and that winds us up still further. So mindfulness-based process involving the breath and paying attention to how your body feels and changes is one of the strategies. And as I said, you're going to get a copy of these slides. So many of us who are very used to living in our heads and may have jobs that involve an awful lot of brain power may have a harder time tapping into how our body is feeling and what our emotions are. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and Betty Ann is going to
Well,
leave.
before I go to the meditation, Kellie, I'd like to ask you, what was the silver lining for you for COVID?
That's a very good question. The silver lining for me was I had been working really hard at learning how to be present, to not be doing all the time. I was still working 5 or 6 days a week though, and racing around and then journaling about how to be. And then all of a sudden, 90% of my work was canceled, and here I have all this time to be. So I'm spending tons of time in the garden and sleeping in and baking and doing not very damn much, and I quite like it. What about you?
I think that I actually improved a lot of my relationships. First of all, I looked up a whole lot of high school friends that I had completely lost touch with, and I phoned them, and I had a good visit with them. And I would never have done that otherwise because I'd have been too busy. And so the fact that I was here and I had time to do it meant that I made contact, and it was all good heart work. Mm-hmm. And I think I actually improved my relationship with my husband because I wasn't, again, running off to this, running off to that. I was just here, and we ate more meals together, and we had more visits. And so, that was all positive.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I've really noticed is a lot of people in my life who don't live in Regina, I'm from the East, have reached out, and we've had Zoom calls, and oh my God, it's been lovely. And so I picked up the phone and talked to a high school friend last weekend, and I thought, why don't I do that more? And I've been hearing that from others as well.
Yeah. And the other thing I think for me is I've learned to appreciate a simpler life. Like, a lot of the excesses are gone and I don't need them.
Well, and I said to Jay, it's like Groundhog Day, because he's like, what are you doing today? Well, the same thing I did yesterday. Coffee with the cat, flower garden, try not to eat all the cheese, and do some work. So I'll turn it over to you.
So we'll do a meditation. And so I'd like you to put your feet flat on the floor and put your hands on your like about your knees. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Take a couple of real deep cleansing breaths. And now I want you to start feeling relaxation come into your toes. And then feel that relaxation move into the balls of your feet and into your arches and into your heels and then into your ankles and into your calves. Feel the relaxation moving up into your knees, into your thighs, into your pelvic area, in your stomach, in your chest. Now that relaxation is in your shoulders, and it's flowing down into your arms and your elbows and your wrists and your hands and your fingers. I'll feel that relaxation moving up into your neck and into your head, and down through your forehead and your eyes and your nose and your mouth. At the top of your head, imagine a healing white light that's circling your body on a counterclockwise all the way down from the top of your head to your feet. And now I want you to imagine that you're by the edge of a river, and you walk into that river. It's a beautiful, warm river, and it's got big trees on either side of it. It feels so sheltered, so secure, and the water's so warm. And you lay down in that water, and only your face is above the water with your arms and your legs outspread like a starfish. And the water's supporting you, and you're floating along. You're not trying to manipulate that water. You're flowing with it. It's just like for the first 9 months of your life when you lived in the womb and everything was provided for you, all the food and everything that you needed. For the rest of your life, everything is going to be supplied for you. You can trust that. You can trust that it's a friendly universe and it's bringing you everything that you need for the rest of your life. And it will be delivered as you need it. I want to close with a little quote that says, "A bird in a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking, because its trust is not in the branch, but in its ability to fly." The pandemic may have broken our branch, but we've all been born with wings, and this is our chance to learn to use them. We can trust ourselves to get where we need to go, to say what we need to say, to do what we need to do, to know what we need to know, and to become all that we have to become or want to become. We can trust and accept. We don't need to control.
Thank you, Betty Ann. So peace and love to all of you, and look after yourselves and everyone in your life, and find ways to let go.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I think for Kellie and I, this has been a great opportunity for us to learn what we needed to learn, and to be able to share it with you was a great honor. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.